All right, Sebastian, go ahead.
All right. Yeah, we have a couple of projects which are again at a state that they can be released. For Stdlib, we had a couple of fixes for the CMake, which are crucial for building for the platforms we're now testing in our CI. So currently we're patching them, but this is kind of suboptimal for everybody else. So yeah, I guess we can just go ahead and merge this one. And yeah, and similar for the other two, for the MinPack, we have been waiting. I don't know exactly for what. And I think the FPM also got all the features in. So now it's just somebody has to take the initiative and actually do the release.
Sebastian, so Ivan asked this question for Stdlib release. Is there anything else special or manual to do other than, okay, creating a tag, pushing the tag to the repo, and then doing that, draft a new release thing, and then you copy paste?
For Stdlib, actually not. So you just create this release and you're done. For FPM, there's an actual wiki page which describes all the steps for doing the release. And this is what we have usually done when releasing FPM. And this includes steps like creating the release, waiting for everything to upload, announcing it in the Fortran-lang discourse, creating a tweet, looking into the packages. So the standard MSys2, the conda forge was usually automatic. What else? Spuck, things like this. I mean, some of those also apply for Stdlib. So I would guess these guidelines there apply more or less also for Stdlib to do the release. But the main work is creating the tag, pushing it, and then maybe announce it in a discourse, so there's a place to discuss.
Okay, great. Now that you explained it nicely, I feel confident to go ahead and create the Stdlib release. I don't think I'm yet ready for the FPM release, but at least I'll read the guide that you made for that. So maybe I'll be ready for next one. I don't know if you mentioned, I missed it, but what's needed for the MinPack release? I looked at that issue and it almost looked like, so there's a link that takes you to the milestone, but the milestone just takes you back.
Exactly. I mean, I usually create a milestone for each release. So if anyone wants to associate something with this release, which should be done before it is created, they can do, but usually nobody does. At least so far, I've been the only one adding those milestones and associating content with it.
Okay.
I mean, this is one way to track it. There are obviously other ways to track this, but I found it was kind of the most convenient way to see what features are going in.
Just to remark, Sebastian, are other people aware of this method? I can imagine. Well, I wasn't aware. I can imagine that other people are not paying that attention either.
Well, usually what I did was create an issue for creating next release or discussion associated with the milestone and link to the milestone and tell people to just associate their content and their pull requests with this milestone. And usually if you look at your in the web user interface, for each issue or pull request on the right-hand side, you will see something like milestones where you can just click and then associate it with just one click to the respective version milestone.
Right. Okay, thanks.
There are obviously other ways to track it, but this is the way which GitHub natively supports.
Sebastian, I've been using so far. Are milestones overlapping in any way in functionality with projects. So I've used projects to group issues, and I've actually used projects to do what I think of milestones. How are milestones different?
They're a bit more lighter than projects. You don't need this automation, which you usually have to put in your project board. So in project board, in this usually release, you would have 3 stages, like this to do, in progress, done. And in milestones, you have like to do and done. And it's always automated. So it's kind of a light version of a project board to track specific events. And you can add a time when this milestone is due, and you can also close it, and then it's going to disappear from the selection. But a project is usually something which stays around.
Got it, thanks. Should we discuss a little bit this question of Makefile builds? This is an old topic. So Makefile builds, basically manual makefiles. We have makefiles that are committed into the Stdlib repo. They've been there since the start of Stdlib. I was one of the proponents of manual makefiles back from the time when I was both uncomfortable with and disliking CMake, and I have become more flexible and amenable since. And also since FPM has appeared, now I'm mostly using FPM, but I have not personally used the Makefile builds for Stdlib in probably a year. It's generally a burden for maintainers. Actually not so much maintainers, it's a burden for contributors, because anybody contributing a new feature to Stdlib, well, you have to integrate it with all the build systems. So you also have to edit all the makefiles. It's not just one. So there's one at the top level directory, but there's one at the source level directory, and then one for test. There may be a few more. Anyhow, it's just tedious. I don't believe it covers much use case nowadays. I'm gonna go see, we had a poll about this on Discourse. Let's see if I can dig it out. Where there were, okay, I can't find it now easily, but yeah, so Sebastian, do you have an idea, like, should we discuss this now at a more actionable level? Like, hey, let's revisit this, open a pull request to remove Makefile support, and then just see if there aren't any objections and just go forward with it. I think overall, like all maintainers and probably all contributors to Stdlib are on board with removing it. There may have been a few users of Makefile builds.
One thing I've been seeing is that there was a lot of requests regarding failing manual Makefile builds and features which are not working. And fixing those, I mean, I tried, but not all of them are that straightforward in this recursive make strategy, which I'm not really familiar with. So I can write one monolithic Makefile which can handle everything. But I've never been a big user of recursive make. So I don't know about the other developers, or other contributors, how confident they feel to implement a feature in the Makefile, so in case it breaks. Otherwise, I mean, if we have nobody who is able to contribute to it or modify it, then it's kind of a thing like it's going to stay in the repository until it's completely broken, and we say, okay, we don't really care, and we're going to remove it. So far, I haven't really seen anyone who, other than users, is deeply enough cares to actually contribute new features or fix bugs in the setup. So I'm not sure whether it's not going to break eventually on its own, and then we have something in our repository which just doesn't work, and then we just have to remove it. And right now, it's more or less seems at least most of the active contributors don't really care about it.
Right. If any, a concern I have are about users of the Makefile. So the fact that we're getting those reports of broken make indicates people are trying to use it. I'm just going to show you, I managed to dig out this poll. I'm going to share screen for you who are not aware of it. Browser. Okay, you see the poll? Okay, and keep in mind, so this is from September last year. This was actually, I think, a poorly thought out and designed poll, because I initially framed it as like, what do you currently use to build Stdlib, and what do you want or intend to use, which is kind of two separate questions. And that was before we introduced support for FPM build. Stdlib. There were 38 voters with 550 total votes, because multiple answers are possible. FPM in the lead, CMake second. There was a minority of 15% Makefile preference, and I think a few people commented that they use Make. Okay, so Harris said, I use the Makefile. Okay. So what we could do to I don't know, I think the best next step would really be to open an issue or post in the existing issue about this on GitHub and say, hey, are there any objections to removing this? And then let it be for a week or two. Almost certainly, there will be users that will not write, users of Makefile that will not write in that issue, probably because they won't see it. But I think what we're weighing here is removing the cost of maintaining Makefile. Does it offset the benefit for the few users that are using it? Will they easily transition to CMake or FPM? And also we can look at it from the point of view of kind of enforcing or encouraging FPM adoption. Hey, we're cutting support for this tool because we want you to use this other tool. What do you think? Would that be a good next step?
Yeah, I would be on board with opening this discussion again, stating the current situation that we think the Makefile is suboptimal compared to what we have already with FPM support, and encourage users to switch. And if there's, then we can see what the response is going to be. So yeah, there was already this issue. I don't know what if there was a large response at this time.
Would it make sense to examine the contributed Makefiles and see how easy it is to get them away and have every support via FPM or say CMake? I mean, you can go well overboard with Makefiles, but my experience with the Fortran programs is that mostly the makefiles can be very simple. That's quite different.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's quite different if you have C or C++, where quite often the include files depend on the system you're at, and a lot of the options also. Whereas for Fortran, that seems to be, at least in my experience, much less the case. So I would imagine that makefiles are much simpler in many cases than you may expect from other languages. Supporting the build of these packages via FPM or CMake might not be all that costly. That's what I would imagine. So it might be an easier way to move away from makefiles altogether.
From my experience, at least for the things I did with Stdlib makefiles, they're quite complicated in the way that you have to declare the dependencies manually. And if you have bad luck, you won't catch that you didn't declare one. Maybe in the 10th CI iterations afterwards, it's going to break. Other thing which we have, because we have to support many Fortran compilers, and we also have to do version checks for certain Fortran versions. And I think also, on the other hand, for several compilers, we actually have to do checks, and we can't do them easily in a makefile without adding very difficult logic. Then we have this preprocessor we're supporting, so they are quite involved already, and yeah, and the recursive make strategy we are using doesn't make it easier to implement new features or adjust those.
Okay, well, how about providing a transition guide?
I find it difficult to imagine a transition guide other than just a guide for using either tool, either CMake or FPM. And I think we already have instructions for those. Let's see what the README says. Okay, we have build with CMake. Okay, detailed instructions. Build with make. Build with FPM. Side note, I'd like to also move this to the top. And at least until we get rid of it, have this at the bottom. That way we at least sort of imply our own preference. Yeah, I think because they're almost completely orthogonal to each other. Is there really any sort of transition other than, hey, here's how you do it with CMake, or here's how you do it with FPM?
Well, the biggest disadvantage of makefiles, or disadvantages, are, first of all, you have to take care of platform dependencies yourself. Mm-hmm. And secondly, you have to be careful about the dependencies between files, whereas FPM and CMake can automate that. So perhaps stressing the advantages of these two tools over plain makefiles could be the way forward here. Just thinking out loud.
Yeah, and maybe you also even meant, which I didn't understand at first, also about like a developer's guide, not just user's guide. Because also adding files to a CMake build is much easier than adding it to a manual makefile. Like if you add a new source file. And with FPM, it's the simplest, no doubt. Okay, cool. I think we have a good way forward to basically rekindle the discussion and ask people for a more actionable, hey, do you object to this?
I'd love to talk to you. How's your day going?
Any other comments or questions about this?
Thanks for sharing. You know, it always makes me feel better on good or bad days.
I'm curious, Peter, what do you use to build stuff? Your Fortran projects. Hey, Google, stop. I apologize.
Well, I use Visual Studio. That's one thing. CMake, Makefile, plain command line. It all depends on whether I'm cooperating here with my colleagues in a large program. We recently moved from Visual Studio and Auto Tools to CMake to generate the Visual Studio stuff for Windows and the Makefiles for Linux. And it took much more than we thought at first, but it is really helping us because we now have only one build system to worry about. These things are not too large, or if I'm developing small programs myself, then often the command line is good enough.
For myself, when I building my own projects, it's a bit of a mixture, depends on, yeah. So I do have Visual Studio, and it's a sort of a complete one-stop shopping package, right? It has, you know, compiler, and all the builds are done with this interface, the IDE, taking care of what's in the background. But then also I'm running these codes from the universities that develop their own Makefiles, which I then compile and execute by emulating a Linux platform using Cygwin, of all things. So I'm running Cygwin, and then I download their package, unzip it, or do the corresponding tar unzip, and then they have their own Makefile specifically for their code. So yeah, I have to be flexible with whatever environment I'm working in and such, right? So there's a bit of a learning curve for each one, but then you get comfortable doing whatever's required to get something to work, really. So I personally don't really have, a strong opinion one way or the other. So long as it works in the end, I'm happy with that, which seems a bit, yeah.
All right. Have you had chance to try FPM yet?
Not yet. No. I was sort of looking at FPM, and then also looking at the various things that are involved in or included in the standard library there. And because some of the things, you're finding that you might be recreating something, reinventing the wheel, as it were, right? But if you have these tools now that are available for you, then in this library, that would be great. But I have not, as of yet, had a chance to try the FPM.
All right. Any other comments or things to discuss? Sounds like a no. Thank you, everybody.
Hello.
Oh, Paulo, go ahead.
Yes, I am not I'm not a developer about Fortran. I am a user of Fortran. I would like to participate in this meeting just to see how the updates and the development in Fortran is happening. Because everybody who doesn't use Fortran think that Fortran is a dead language. And I would like to make a question. Again, I'm not a developer. I am professor of physics in a university here in Brazil, and I use Fortran for my research in computational physics. Fortran is very heavily used in physics, in one line of computational physics. So a lot of researchers in physics use Fortran because it is fast, and I like to think it is not complicated to write the code. So I am using since 2015, and there is a large Brazilian community and in the world usually. But I think in Brazil, there's a large community using Fortran. In this, where it is a very specific niche. It's one line of research in computational physics. Anyway, I would like to ask, I use Fortran, I use Linux, and there is GCG or GGC, which is the Fortran that came in Linux. I use Visual Code to make the code. I don't use CMake. I don't even know what it is. I just write the codes and compile the codes in terminal. Fortran, put some flags. And I would like to ask, what there is the latest version of Fortran is 2018. And this version is included in this Fortran that comes with Linux. If I want to use, for example, in my Linux Pop OS, is there a flag where I can choose the compiler to use the 2018 version, or is it another program, that compiler that I have to download from website?
Okay, so it's complicated. 2018 is the addition of the language, and GCC, the compiler, supports hopefully full language, but usually most of the language. Often compilers will not support few of the latest features, and more recent features also tend to be buggy or not completely implemented in compilers. I believe GFortran, which is the Fortran compiler of GCC, I think it has a flag -fstd equals either F 2018 or 2018, which, if I recall correctly, will accept code that is, at least to the compiler on first look, standard conforming as per the 2018 edition. Sebastian, did I get it right, do you think?
Yes. In general, if you don't specify what standard you want, to check against, you'll probably get the latest one, plus possibly a number of extensions. And so things that are useful for GFortran, I don't know by heart what might that be. They might not work with, say, Intel Fortran or NAG Fortran or whatever. Whereas if you use the standard flag, then that sort of things are forbidden because they're not part of the language. A popular extension would be real star 8, for instance, to indicate dull precision. Well, that's not part of the language. It has been a very popular extension ever since the 80s, or even before that. But the standard way is to use kinds, and then you might have real between parentheses 8 rather than real star 8. That's one thing. Most compilers will accept the real star 8. But it's certainly not a standard part. So that's one reason to use that sort of flags.
And one more question, if I can. And so you all of you, the group that all of you are being part, making these developments for Fortran, and the idea is that the developments that all of you implement, they will be, as time goes on, they will be available in the Linux compiler, or the idea is that you make a different compiler, a separated compiler that we should download and use. What is the idea in terms of the progress of the developments? They will be available in Linux or separate compiler?
I'd say that could be part of the, say, vision, even if not practical, to expect that, you know, the tools and libraries that we develop will become part of compilers. Ultimately, it's the compiler teams that choose based on their either customers or users what to implement, what not to implement. Perhaps where I maybe see most overlap with compilers or the language is, say, Stdlib. There's one of the initial motivations for Stdlib was one, there were a lot of requests from people to implement new intrinsic functions. So functions and subroutines that are part of the language. And it's not easy to design a function, both regarding its behavior and interface, how it looks like to the user on paper without, you know, experimentation, giving it to users to beta test. And so without, you know, some requests for the language that are for, say, intrinsics could be implemented in a library and tested before it's proposed to be added to the language. And this also allows you to kind of develop a track record or evidence of use. Like, is this function really all that useful? You know, if it proves to have a lot of use, you know, you could argue that it may make sense to make this broadly available through the language by compilers. Tools like FPM, maybe, you know, years down the road may see some more tighter integration with compilers, but I'm unclear whether a tool like that could or should be more integrated, like part of the language. I think it can be very effective and useful on its own, without necessarily trying to become part of. I think these are just different scopes that don't necessarily overlap much. My opinion.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers. I'd like to participate just to comment to see, and thank you very much for the attention and for the answers.
Thank you for joining, and I hope to see you again in the following months. All right, with that, let's conclude. Thanks, everybody. Talk later.
All right.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.